"Mom, they told me I can't come back to school unless I change my hair." Her daughter's voice trembled through the phone, but it was what she said next that stopped Danielle's heart. "They said my braids are a distraction, and that I'm suspended until further notice." Danielle's hand froze mid-stir in the pot of collard greens. She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The scent of home-cooked dinner turned bitter in her nose. In that moment, a single mother in North Carolina realized something chilling. Her daughter wasn't being punished for her behavior. She was being punished for being unapologetically black. It was a Monday morning at Durham Hills Middle School, and 13-year-old Aiyana James had stepped into the building with her usual quiet confidence. Her box braids swayed as she walked the hall, gold cuffs glinting between the neat rows, framing her youthful face. For Aiyana, the braids weren't just style. They were a part of her culture, a way of honoring her grandmother, who had taught her how to part and plait each strand with love. But as she reached her locker, whispers followed her. "She's not supposed to have that," someone muttered. "Did you see the dress code email?" Another whispered. "She looks like she's about to go to a rap video." Aiyana stiffened but said nothing. She was used to the stares, used to being the only one. But she wasn't ready for what happened next. As the bell rang and she slipped into homeroom, her teacher, Ms. Carver, gave her a look she hadn't seen before, not just disapproval, disdain. By second period, she was called to the principal's office. There, behind a polished desk, sat Principal Elaine Monroe, a woman who smiled for the cameras, but rarely for the black students in her care. "Aiyana," she began, her voice syrupy with fake concern, "we need to talk about your hair." Aiyana's eyebrows lifted slightly. "What about it?" Principal Monroe leaned forward. "It's inappropriate. The new student handbook explicitly states that hairstyles must be neat, natural, and non-distracting. Those braids don't meet the criteria." Aiyana blinked, trying to process. "They're box braids, ma'am. I've had them before. Not with that length. Or those accessories." The principal shot back. "You've received one warning. Now it's suspension. 3 days. Until you return with a compliant hairstyle." The words hit Aiyana like a slap. "But I haven't done anything wrong," she said quietly, her voice cracking. "I get straight A's. I don't fight. I don't talk back." Principal Monroe stood. "This isn't about your grades. It's about the rules. If you want to remain a student at Durham Hills, you'll follow them." That afternoon, Aiyana sat in the front seat of her mother's Toyota Corolla, silent. She stared at the dashboard, holding back tears. Danielle James, her mother, gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled rage. "She said what?" Danielle asked, her voice low. Aiyana repeated it. "She said my hair is a distraction." Danielle's jaw clenched. "A distraction to who, Aiyana? You're not up in anyone's face. You don't wear crop tops. You show up, you do your work, you come home. How is your hair a problem?" Aiyana didn't answer. Danielle knew why. Because this wasn't new. From the time her daughter had been old enough to speak, she had been labeled too assertive, too loud, too confident. All while white girls wore French braids and bright dye and never got a second look. But now it had escalated. Now, her baby was being kicked out of school. For existing. By Tuesday, Danielle was at the school. And she wasn't alone. She walked in wearing a fitted blazer and natural curls pulled into a crown. In her hand, a leather folder thick with printouts, state statutes, federal codes, and Title VI civil rights documentation. But when she got to the front desk, the secretary's eyes narrowed. "Do you have an appointment with Principal Monroe?" "No," Danielle replied, calm but firm. "But she's going to want to make time." Principal Monroe eventually appeared, lips pressed into a thin line. "Ms. James, if this is about your daughter's suspension, I'm afraid." Danielle raised a hand. "It is about my daughter. But it's also about every black girl who's been told she's a problem because of the way she was born." Principal Monroe stiffened. Our policies apply equally to all students. Danielle opened her folder. Really? Because I have 3 screenshots of white students with blue streaks in their hair on your school's Instagram page. Not one of them was suspended. Not one. The principal's face flushed. Danielle leaned closer. You've got 24 hours to reinstate my daughter and issue a written apology. Or I take this folder to the state board. And the press. But the school didn't back down. Instead, the school board sent a notice home. They claimed the suspension was in accordance with district dress and grooming standards. They said Aiyana's hairstyle could encourage nonconformity and pose a distraction to the learning environment. Danielle stared at the letter, then looked at her daughter, her innocent, brilliant daughter, curled up on the couch trying not to cry. And she knew. This fight wasn't going to be won behind closed doors. So Danielle went public. She took to Facebook, shared Aiyana's story, posted photos, spoke with clarity and fire. Within hours, it had over 3,000 shares. By that evening, a local journalist reached out. Then a civil rights attorney. Then a mother whose son had been suspended for wearing a do-rag during PE. The story was exploding. And Danielle wasn't stopping. Friday night, she stood before the Durham Hills School Board. Aiyana sat behind her, flanked by classmates, neighbors, and even one of her former teachers who had quietly resigned over similar bias. Danielle stepped up to the mic, voice unwavering. You suspended my daughter for having braids, she began. But what you really suspended her for was being proud of who she is. Murmurs rippled through the room. She held up the handbook. You say these rules apply to everyone, but we all know they don't. You didn't write this policy to protect education. You wrote it to police black identity. Principal Monroe looked down at her notes, refusing eye contact. Danielle continued. You didn't suspend her because she violated policy. You suspended her because she challenged your comfort zone. Because her hair is a reminder that blackness can't be muted, trimmed, or tucked away. Applause broke out in the back. Someone stood up, and then a booming voice echoed from the doors of the chamber. Excuse me, the man said, his voice commanding. I'm here on behalf of the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights. The room fell silent. Danielle slowly turned, her heart pounding. The man held up a badge. We received a civil complaint earlier this week about racial discrimination tied to grooming policies. I've been asked to open an investigation into the Durham Hills School District. Eyes widened. The board chair fumbled his water glass. And Danielle? She just smiled. As the civil rights officer steps forward, Principal Monroe abruptly stands and walks out of the room, ignoring the board, the crowd, and the federal agent. What she does next will not only shock the town, but expose a hidden agenda that runs deeper than anyone could have imagined. As Principal Monroe's heels clicked sharply against the tile floor, the crowd inside the boardroom murmured in confusion. Danielle's eyes narrowed. Why was she leaving now? Why not stay and defend her decision? The civil rights officer, Agent Malcolm Price, glanced at the board, then back toward the doors where Monroe had exited. We'll proceed, he said. But I will be requesting access to disciplinary records, board meeting minutes, and all grooming policy correspondence. The board chair, a balding man with a tense smile, cleared his throat. Of course, Agent Price. We're happy to cooperate fully. But his hands trembled as he shuffled his papers. Danielle turned to her daughter. Aiyana sat still, wide-eyed. She'd never seen adults look this scared before. But Danielle had. And it meant only one thing. Someone was hiding something. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Principal Monroe stormed into her office, slamming the door behind her. Her assistant looked up, startled. Get me Donna, she snapped, pacing the floor. Now. Donna Halpern, head of the school district's legal team, was on speaker within minutes. Calm down, Donna said. What's going on? They're here, Monroe hissed. Federal. OCR. They're digging into everything. Danielle James has gone full activist. There was silence on the other end. Then Donna's voice dropped. You need to listen to me very carefully. If they get access to the 2020 grooming policy draft, the real one, we're screwed. Principal Monroe stopped pacing. I thought that draft was destroyed, she whispered. Donna sighed. It was supposed to be. But remember, board member Keller refused to delete his copy. He said he'd hold on to it just in case. Monroe sat down slowly, her confidence cracking, because she remembered exactly what that original policy said. Flashback, March 2020. The original grooming and dress standards draft was circulated on a Zoom call between the school board and Monroe. The language had been explicit. Terms like excessive afro styles, urban hair accessories, and street-inspired hairstyles peppered the document. Monroe had raised a concern at the time. If we use this exact language, she said, we could get hit with a discrimination complaint. To which Keller, an older board member, had replied with a smirk. Let's not pretend. We're not writing this for the white kids. Some board members chuckled. Others looked away. Monroe remembered feeling uneasy, but she hadn't pushed back. Not really. Instead, the document was reworded, made vague enough to pass legal muster, but targeted enough to apply pressure where they wanted it. Now, years later, that same policy had come back like a ticking time bomb. Back in Danielle's kitchen that night, she couldn't sleep. She sat at the table with her laptop open, a single lamp glowing beside her. The article she'd written, "My daughter was suspended for her hair. I won't be silent," had gone viral. Emails flooded in from parents across the country. One message read, "My daughter got detention last month for wearing twists. We live in Georgia. You're not alone." Another, "Thank you for standing up. My son was forced to cut his locks for a school wrestling match. We're still in court." Danielle felt tears sting her eyes. It wasn't just about Aiyana anymore. This was a fight bigger than Durham Hills. The next morning, something strange happened. Danielle received an anonymous envelope in her mailbox. No return address. No note. Just a USB drive. She hesitated, then plugged it into her laptop. What she saw made her blood run cold. It was a video recording. A screen capture from a virtual meeting. The faces of the Durham Hills school board members filled the screen. One of them, board member Keller, was speaking. "If we let these hairstyles slide, next thing you know, it's sagapants, slang, and gang signs in the hallways." Laughter. Someone else chimed in. "We just want them to look normal, respectable." Then Principal Monroe's voice. "We need to write this so we can enforce it without triggering lawsuits. Use words like neat, natural, and non-distracting. It'll give us flexibility." The video ended. Danielle's hand flew to her mouth. She sat frozen in her chair. This wasn't just racial bias. It was premeditated policy. And they'd left a trail. By noon, Danielle was sitting with attorney Miles Carter, a young civil rights lawyer with sharp eyes and sharper instincts. He'd seen the video. "That's your smoking gun," Miles said. "They'll deny it, but this proves intent. And if that draft still exists somewhere, it's only a matter of time before we find it." Danielle's voice shook. "They tried to break my daughter. We're not just going after the school now. We're going after the whole board." Miles leaned in. "Then it's time to file a federal lawsuit. Discrimination. Emotional distress. Policy violation. We'll take this as far as it needs to go." Danielle nodded. She wasn't afraid anymore. Back at Durham Hills, cracks were beginning to show. Students had begun to protest. Monday morning, nearly a third of the school walked out at 10 a.m. carrying signs. "My hair is not a distraction. Let us be us. Braids aren't the problem, bias is." Principal Monroe watched from her office window, her face pale. News vans were parked across the street. One teacher whispered in the staff lounge, "She's lost the school." But the most devastating blow came that evening. Board member Keller's personal email account was hacked. The public saw everything. Attached was a PDF labeled, "Grooming Policy Draft. Do not circulate." The same one Donna had warned Monroe about. The language was worse than anyone had imagined. And the public backlash was immediate. The NAACP released a statement. A federal judge approved the filing of an emergency injunction. Even local businesses began pulling their donations to the school's funding drives. At home, Aiyana sat on the couch scrolling through her phone. "I'm trending," she whispered. Danielle looked over her shoulder. Aiyana's face was on every major blog. People were calling her a hero. Danielle kissed her forehead. "No, baby," she said. "You're just someone who refused to shrink." But just as they started to breathe, a knock at the door. Danielle opened it cautiously. A young man stood there, nervous, eyes darting. "Are you Ms. James?" he asked. "Yes." He held out a manila envelope. "I was told to give this to you, but I can't say who sent it." Danielle opened the envelope. Inside was a copy of Principal Monroe's resignation letter, but it wasn't signed. And in the corner was a handwritten note. "She won't go quietly. She has leverage, and she's not afraid to use it." Danielle looked up. "Wait, what leverage?" But the man was already walking away. As Danielle and Attorney Miles begin to dig deeper into the resignation letter, they uncover a secret file hidden on Monroe's district computer, one that links the principal to something far darker than racial bias. And what they find will threaten not just Monroe's career, but someone's life. Danielle sat in stunned silence, the unsigned resignation letter trembling in her hands. The note attached to it echoed in her mind like a warning bell. She won't go quietly. She has leverage, and she's not afraid to use it. Across the kitchen table, Attorney Miles Carter narrowed his eyes. "Leverage," he muttered. What kind of leverage could a principal possibly have? Danielle didn't know, but she knew one thing for sure. Monroe wasn't afraid of losing her job, because she had something bigger to protect. Later that night, Miles made a few discreet calls. One of his contacts, a former IT administrator from the school district, owed him a favor. "I don't know what you're looking for," the man said, "but I've heard rumors about a folder on Monroe's district-issued laptop. Something encrypted, password protected. Only she had access." "What kind of folder?" Miles asked. "Don't know. But the file name started with WHS. WHS. Miles repeated. "What's that mean?" "No clue. But I heard she kept a backup on a flash drive. Bright red. Always kept it in her desk drawer." Miles hung up. They needed that flash drive. And fast. The next morning, Danielle received another unexpected visit. It was Ms. Lena Thornton, a longtime janitor at Durham Hills and one of the only black employees who had worked there longer than Monroe. She glanced around nervously before speaking. "I heard what you and your lawyer are doing," she whispered, "and I want to help." Danielle leaned in. "Why now?" Lena looked down. "Because I've seen too much. Too many of our kids being punished for being themselves. And I've kept my mouth shut long enough." She handed Danielle a folded post-it note. It read, "Principal's office. Bottom drawer. Red USB. File labeled WHS. Password. 1997 Skyline." Danielle's breath caught. "How do you know this?" Lena hesitated. "Let's just say, I clean the offices, and I remember the things people forget to hide." That evening, with the help of Miles' tech team, they accessed the USB. The folder opened. Dozens of files, memos, PDFs, audio clips, and one document stood out immediately. WHS project proposal. Confidential. For board eyes only. Danielle clicked it. Her mouth dropped open. The WHS project, short for West Hill Schools Expansion Initiative, was a partnership between the Durham Hills School District and a private real estate firm. The goal: redevelop underperforming schools into charter programs with strict codes and investor backing. But the document revealed something sinister. Under a section titled Target Demographics, it listed, phase out low-income minority populations. Enforce behavioral and appearance codes to reduce disciplinary challenges. Boost test scores by selective enrollment. Partner with correctional data firms for predictive discipline analysis. Danielle was horrified. They weren't just trying to control students. They were trying to engineer who stayed and who got pushed out. Aiyana hadn't just been suspended because of her hair. She'd been labeled a statistical liability. They called it reform, but it was racial cleansing in educational form. Worse, Monroe had signed off on the first phase. Miles leaned over the screen. This isn't just discrimination. This is systemic targeting. This is how the school-to-prison pipeline gets built. Danielle's voice broke. They were trying to erase our kids, one policy at a time. But then, they found the audio. A file labeled WHSMTG_Keller_Monroe_2_14.wave. Danielle clicked play. Monroe's voice. We can't afford a lawsuit, Keller. This family's not going to back down. Keller, then give her what she wants. Reinstatement. An apology. It'll blow over. Monroe, it's not just about her. If we cave to one, others will follow. We'll lose control. Keller, coldly, then shut it down. Leak something. Dig into the mom. We need dirt. Monroe, her file's clean. Nothing to work with. Keller, then make something up. Or we cut you loose, Elaine. Your contract, your benefits, gone. You know what we've covered for you in the past. Click. The recording ended. Danielle's hand flew to her mouth. Miles whispered, What did he mean? What we've covered for you in the past. Danielle looked up, eyes wide. She opened a new folder on the USB labeled Incident Reports, sealed. What they found was worse than anything they had imagined. Inside was a sealed complaint file from 2019, an internal report alleging that Principal Monroe had covered up a physical altercation between a staff member and a student. A black boy, falsely accused of theft, was slammed against a locker by a security guard. The boy was injured. His parents threatened legal action. But the file showed that Monroe had altered the incident report to say the child tripped and fell. Attached was a scanned check, a payout to the family, signed by the district. Everything had been buried. Quietly, Danielle whispered, This is a pattern, and they've been paying to make it disappear. They knew what they had to do. Miles said, We leaked this to the media. All of it. Tonight. Danielle agreed. But something still didn't sit right. The USB, the sealed files, the resignation letter. Someone wanted them to find this, which meant one thing. This wasn't over. That night, as the story broke across major news outlets, a firestorm ignited. Durham Hill's principal tied to grooming policy scandal. Leaked files show targeted discrimination. Whistleblower alleges systemic abuse in charter expansion plot. Students began protesting again. Teachers walked out in solidarity. The governor's office released a statement. And the school board? They called an emergency closed-door meeting. But then, the unthinkable happened. The next morning, Monroe was nowhere to be found. Her car was still at her home. Her phone disconnected. Her office locked. She had vanished overnight. Danielle stared at the news alert in disbelief. Principal Elaine Monroe, gone. But it wasn't fear that filled her chest. It was a question. Why disappear? Unless there was more to hide. As Danielle and Miles begin tracing Monroe's last known movements, they uncover a hidden storage unit rented under an alias. What's inside will unravel a deeper conspiracy, one that ties the WHS project to private prisons, falsified student data, and millions in untraceable funding. But they're not the only ones looking for it, and someone dangerous is now following their every move. 2 days after Principal Monroe vanished, Danielle found herself sitting in a coffee shop across from Miles, both of them bleary-eyed from digging through documents and fielding non-stop media requests. "She's not just hiding," Miles said, stirring his coffee. "She's running." "From what?" Danielle asked. She already had everything to lose. Miles opened his laptop and turned it toward her. "From this." On the screen was a receipt, buried deep within district reimbursement records. It was for a monthly payment made out to Barlow Self-Storage number 517, located 15 miles outside Durham Hills. The payments were listed under Facilities Maintenance, Archival Storage. But when Miles cross-referenced the line item, the address didn't match any school property. "She's been storing something off the books," he said, "and she's been billing it to the school." Danielle leaned in. "Then let's go find out what it is." The next morning, they drove to Barlow Self-Storage. It was a dusty, industrial-looking facility with high fencing and keypad entry. The receptionist, a tired young man named Javier, barely looked up until Miles slid a printed subpoena across the counter. "We're here for Unit 517, he said. "We have legal authority to access it." Javier blinked. "Yeah, that one's weird. No one ever comes to it. Been rented for years under the name E. Monroe, but the payment stopped 2 days ago." He handed them the unit key and led them down a long corridor of metal doors. When Unit 517 clicked open, a rush of stale air escaped. Inside was nothing but boxes. Dozens of boxes, each labeled by hand with coded names: Board Min 2020, WHS Forecast, M. Keller Notes. And at the back, a tall filing cabinet with one drawer locked. Danielle looked around. "This feels like a cover-up bunker." Miles opened the nearest box. Inside were hundreds of printed student files, mostly Black and Latino students, with red X's across certain pages. He pulled one file and held it up. Target: low performance/chronic grooming violations/watchlist candidate. Danielle gasped. They had a watch list? Miles nodded grimly. They were building a pipeline, predicting which students to phase out before high school. This is textbook academic redlining. They opened another box. Inside, bundled together in manila folders, were emails between the school board and a private firm named Caldwin Analytics. The subject line: Student Behavioral Score Pilot, Corrections Partnership. Danielle froze. Corrections Partnership? Miles read the first paragraph aloud. "As part of Phase 2 of WHS, our partners at North Tech Juvenile Corrections are requesting early access to anonymized behavioral trend data for predictive capacity modeling. This will aid in inmate forecasting and resource allocation." Danielle's stomach dropped. They weren't just profiling students. They were helping prisons plan for them. It wasn't just racism. It was profit. The school had essentially become a data farm, feeding Black and brown student profiles to a for-profit prison system under the disguise of disciplinary analytics. Danielle's hands trembled as she pulled out one last file from a locked drawer Miles had pried open. It was marked Confidential Funding Streams, Caldwin X. Keller. And inside, bank statements, wire transfers, millions in payments traced through shell accounts, kickbacks paid to several board members, including Keller, for pushing through the WHS reform. Danielle whispered, "They sold our children's futures for checks." But just as they were photographing the documents, they heard it. A sharp click behind them. The sound of the storage unit door locking shut. Danielle and Miles spun around. Footsteps. Then silence. "Who's there?" Miles called out. No answer. He reached for his phone, but the signal was dead inside the steel unit. Danielle's eyes scanned the boxes, panic rising. "What do we do?" "We stay calm," Miles said. "We break out. Or we wait. But we don't leave the evidence." 20 minutes later, they were rescued by Javier, who had gone on break and returned to find the lock tampered with. They reported the incident immediately. Police promised to investigate. But Danielle had a sinking feeling. That wasn't random. Someone knew they were getting close. Later that night, Danielle's phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. A man's voice. Distorted. Unrecognizable. You need to stop. You're making enemies you don't understand. Danielle's heart raced. Who is this? They're not going to let you destroy this district. Walk away now, or the next visit won't just be a locked door. Click. Danielle stood frozen in her kitchen, phone still to her ear. The next day, Miles received a tip. A burned-out car had been found in a remote part of Wake County. The license plate? Registered to Elaine Monroe. No body was recovered. No sign of Monroe. But inside the trunk was a stack of shredded paper, partially melted. The forensic team recovered enough to read one name. North Tech Corrections. Danielle now knew the stakes had escalated. This wasn't about getting Aiyana back into school anymore. It was about dismantling a system built to criminalize black kids before they ever had a chance. She met with the state education board, shared the files, pushed for a criminal investigation. She called a press conference outside Durham Hills Middle School. With cameras flashing, she stepped up to the podium. My daughter was suspended because her hair didn't fit in, she began. But what we discovered is that her hair was never the problem. The problem was a machine built to crush kids like her before they could dream. Reporters shouted questions. What do you want, Ms. James? Danielle looked straight at the cameras. I want every single person who profited off our pain to answer for it. In court. That same night, Miles received an encrypted email. No subject line. No sender. Just a single message. If you want the rest of the truth, check the laptop Monroe left in locker 211. Greyhound Station. Raleigh. Attached was a photo of a locker key. Danielle and Miles rushed to the Greyhound station to recover Monroe's hidden laptop, but when they open the locker, it's missing. In its place, a burner phone with one message, "You're too late." But just when they think the trail's gone cold, a former insider steps forward, with a secret that could blow the entire WHS conspiracy wide open, and expose the one person behind it all. Danielle and Miles stood frozen at locker 211 inside the Raleigh Greyhound station. No laptop. No documents, just a burner phone. Miles picked it up. The screen lit up with a single message. You're too late. You're not the only ones looking. Danielle's voice cracked. They're one step ahead of us. Miles nodded, pocketing the phone. But if Monroe left a laptop here, someone else knew it was important. That means there's still someone out there who doesn't want this buried. Danielle looked around the station, her instincts on high alert. Somewhere, someone was watching. Back in Durham Hills, word was spreading fast. The district had gone into full lockdown mode, emails stopped, phones unanswered, offices closed for investigation. But the damage was already done. Dozens of parents had pulled their children from the school. Teachers were threatening to strike. And social media had latched onto the story like wildfire. Hashtag protect our kids. Hashtag hair is not a crime. Hashtag justice for Aiyana. 3 days later, everything changed. Danielle's inbox pinged with a message from an untraceable account. No subject. Just 2 words. Meet me. Attached was a location. Maple Hill Cemetery, 6:45 p.m. Row F, bench under the maple tree. Come alone. Danielle stared at the message. Is this a trap? She whispered. Miles shook his head. Or it's our one shot at finding the truth. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Danielle walked cautiously through the cemetery. She spotted the bench. A man sat alone, his back to her, hands folded. As she approached, he didn't turn. But when he spoke, she recognized the voice immediately. I never meant for it to go this far. It was Marcus Bailey, former assistant superintendent of Durham Hills. A man who had quietly retired 2 years earlier after an undisclosed scandal. Danielle's jaw tightened. You were part of it. Marcus nodded slowly. I was. and I've been carrying it every day since. He pulled out a flash drive and placed it on the bench between them. What's this? Danielle asked. Marcus looked at her. Finally. The blueprint. Everything. The real WHS master plan. Not just this district. 5 others across the state. Same model. Same data pipeline. Same prison partnerships. Danielle stared at him. Why are you giving this to me? Because I tried to fight it once, he said. And they buried me. Smeared my name. But you're not scared. And they're scared of you. Back at Miles' office, they plugged in the flash drive. What they saw made everything they'd uncovered so far look small. The file showed that WHS was just one node in a statewide data mining system, coordinated through Caldwin Analytics, which fed student behavioral data to 3 private prison corporations, all disguised under school reform initiatives. Every grooming violation, every disciplinary infraction, every lowered test score was used to assign a risk score to students. Those risk scores were sold to outside firms, who then used the data to forecast juvenile inmate capacity. And every time a student was suspended for a minor infraction, a percentage of state funds got rerouted through special contracting loopholes. Danielle's voice shook. They turned our children into numbers. Then they sold the numbers. But there was one more bombshell. Miles pointed to a series of invoices. They've been getting payouts, large ones, under a project called Phoenix 2. Look at the signatories. Danielle leaned in. The names made her blood run cold. Keller, Monroe, and one more, State Senator Gerald Pope. Pope was a rising star in state politics. Clean-cut, community-oriented. He'd publicly advocated for restoring order to failing schools. But behind closed doors, he was funding WHS reforms in exchange for prison board seats and 6-figure dividends. Miles stared at the screen. We're not just dealing with educators. This is a statewide operation. It goes to the top. Danielle took a deep breath. And it's time the public knew. The next morning, Danielle and Miles went live on national morning TV. Holding up copies of the flash drive's contents, Danielle spoke with unshakable resolve. This isn't just about my daughter anymore. This is about every black and brown child who's been told they're too loud, too different, too much. About a system that sees them not as students, but as future inmates. The anchors were stunned. Viewers flooded social media with support, and within hours, the U.S. Department of Justice announced a federal probe. Caldwin Analytics' website went dark. Senator Gerald Pope released a no-comment statement as protesters gathered outside his office. But while the world was watching, the danger wasn't over. That night, Danielle's home security system was triggered at 2:03 a.m. The footage showed a masked figure walking the perimeter. He didn't break in, just circled the property, and left something on the porch. A burned flash drive. Melted plastic. Useless. A message was etched into the metal casing. Back off. Or next time, we burn more than plastic. Danielle's knees buckled. Aiyana ran to her side. Mom, what's happening? Danielle hugged her tightly. We're not backing down. Not now. Meanwhile, in a cheap motel room on the edge of town, a figure stepped out of the shadows. Elaine Monroe. Alive. Disheveled. Watching Danielle's TV interview with shaking hands. She reached for her phone and dialed. It's me, she said. They found the files. It's over. A pause. Then her voice dropped. But I still have the laptop. And if I go down, I'm taking all of you with me. With Danielle now targeted and the conspiracy unraveling, Monroe prepares to make one final move. But what she reveals next about Project Phoenix 2 will leave the entire state in shock, because the program wasn't just collecting data on students. It was running illegal psychological experiments on vulnerable kids. And the paper trail leads straight to the state's Department of Education. Danielle sat at her kitchen table, the morning sunlight spilling across piles of case files. But her heart wasn't focused on the paperwork. It was focused on Aiyana, who hadn't slept well in days. Her daughter was quiet now. Too quiet. The kind of silence that settles into a child who has seen too much, too soon. Danielle squeezed her hand. "You okay, baby?" Aiyana gave a brave smile. "I'm okay. But I don't get why they hate us for being us." Danielle fought back tears. "They don't hate us, Aiyana. They fear us. Because they know how powerful we are when we stop shrinking." But even as she comforted her daughter, Danielle couldn't shake the feeling. Something bigger was still hiding in the shadows. Later that day, Monroe made contact. She sent a message through an anonymous email client. "If you want the full story, meet me. 1 hour. No police. Bring your lawyer." Attached was a location, an abandoned charter school project site, shuttered after COVID, miles outside the city. Danielle hesitated. Was it a trap? Miles was blunt. "It's risky, but if she's telling the truth, it could be the last piece." Danielle nodded. "Then let's finish what we started." At 3:04 p.m., they arrived at the decaying building. Windows broken. Rusted signage dangling. The playground choked with weeds. Monroe stepped out of the shadows, wearing sunglasses and a hoodie. Her face gaunt, eyes hollow. "I don't have much time," she said. Miles hit record on his phone. "Then start talking." What she revealed changed everything. Project Phoenix 2, Monroe said, was never just about suspensions or expulsions. She reached into her bag and pulled out the laptop. Deep in the back end of the Caldwin server was a subfolder labeled Behavioral Conditioning Trial Alpha. Only accessible to certain IDs. Mine was one. Danielle leaned forward. They were running unauthorized psychological experiments on selected students, Monroe continued. Mostly kids labeled as high risk. Black kids. Poor kids. Children with learning disabilities. Miles's jaw tightened. Experiments. Monroe nodded. They modified classroom environments, lesson timings, even teacher interactions, to test stress response, impulse control, and behavior under pressure. Without parent consent. Without district approval. They called it data enrichment. But it was human testing. Danielle's voice cracked. "They experimented on our children like lab rats?" Monroe said nothing, just opened the laptop. On the screen were folders labeled. Trial Group B1, Suppressed Stimulation/Delayed Praise. Group A3, Forced Isolation, Grade 6. Anomalous Reaction, A. James, 13048. Danielle froze. A. James. Her hands trembled as she clicked the file. A video loaded. It was Aiyana, from last year, sitting alone in a small room with no windows. The camera watched her silently read worksheets. A staff member entered, scolded her for non-compliance, and removed her snack as punishment. Danielle gasped. She was only 12. Monroe looked away. They wanted to see how different groups responded to environmental control, to manufacture behavior, compliance profiles. Miles was pale. "This violates every ethics law in education. And every human rights standard," Monroe whispered. "They didn't just plan a school-to-prison pipeline. They tried to program it." Danielle felt something snap inside her. This wasn't policy failure. This was abuse. "They used my daughter," she said, trembling, "and hundreds more as guinea pigs." Monroe added one last detail. Each trial was connected to a funding stream labeled ED Test Bio Track, and it's tied directly to the State Department of Education. They green-lit it, and they got bonuses based on program outcomes. Danielle's world tilted. "Senator Pope knew," she said. "But so did the superintendent, the governor's office. This goes beyond the school board." Monroe nodded. "And if I testify, I'm a dead woman." Back at Miles' office, they made a choice. They were going to take it all public. Not just files. Not just video. They were going to live stream Monroe's full confession. It would be dangerous, but it would be undeniable. That night, Danielle posted the teaser to her social media. Tomorrow, 7 p.m. We show the world what they've done to our children. Tune in, share it, save them. The next morning, the attacks began. Emails flooded in, some supportive, others filled with rage, threats, and chilling messages. One email simply read, "Your daughter will pay the price for your mouth." Another, "Keep digging and you'll bury your family next." Danielle reported everything to the FBI, but she knew these people were desperate, and desperate people are dangerous. Hours before the live stream, Monroe vanished again. Her hotel room was found ransacked. No signs of struggle, but her laptop was gone. And in its place, a single sheet of paper. Truth dies in silence. So keep screaming. Miles shook his head. We don't need her live. We've got the video, the files, the recordings. But Danielle couldn't shake the fear that someone had gotten to her first. 7 p.m. The world watched. From living rooms, libraries, barbershops, and courtrooms, millions tuned into the stream. Danielle sat before the camera, her voice calm, her words sharp. They tried to silence us. They tried to shame us. But what they didn't count on was that we don't bend. We don't break. We expose. She played the video, Monroe's confession, the trial footage, the financial documents. By the time the live stream ended, over 6.2 million viewers had watched. Within 48 hours, the state superintendent resigned. A federal grand jury was convened. FBI agents raided Caldwell Analytics headquarters, and Senator Gerald Pope was arrested while boarding a private jet to Miami. But as the headlines blared and the nation reeled, Danielle received one final message. A courier arrived with an unmarked envelope. Inside, a grainy photo. It showed a woman, head down, hoodie up, boarding a ferry in South Carolina. Elaine Monroe. And scribbled on the back, "She's not done." Phoenix wasn't the first, and it won't be the last. As Danielle reflects on the national firestorm she's helped ignite, a terrifying new twist emerges. Project Phoenix was only one branch of a multi-state operation, and now, powerful players are scrambling to cover their tracks. In the final chapter, Danielle must decide, retreat for her family's safety, or risk everything to expose the entire machine once and for all. The media storm reached its peak. Every major news outlet covered the takedown. Danielle James, a single mother who refused to bow, had taken on the system and won. The Department of Justice issued sweeping subpoenas. Senator Pope's assets were frozen. Caldwell Analytics was under federal investigation. But behind the headlines, Danielle knew the truth. This wasn't over. The photo of Monroe boarding that ferry haunted her. Because it wasn't just about Monroe's escape. It was what she said before she disappeared. Phoenix wasn't the first, and it won't be the last. 2 weeks later, the FBI confirmed it. Project Phoenix 2 was part of a network of programs, run in 6 states, under different names, all connected by shadow contracts and quietly passed school reform bills. Each version used different language, different vendors, but the same outcome. Profile the kids, track them, control them, sell the data. Danielle sat in Miles' office staring at the whiteboard covered in state maps and timelines. Each of these programs, Miles explained, operated under the radar using federal grants. They packaged it as innovation, as educational tech, but in reality, it was exploitation. State-sanctioned surveillance of our kids. Danielle shook her head in disbelief. And all of it legal, because they rewrote the rules. Miles nodded. They didn't break the law. They became the law. That night, Danielle sat with Aiyana on the porch. The stars blinked overhead. A breeze carried the scent of honeysuckle. "You changed the world, baby," Danielle whispered. Aiyana leaned on her shoulder. I just wanted to go to school and be left alone. Danielle smiled softly. And because you spoke up, thousands of kids will be. In the following weeks, real change began to take root. Durham Hills School Board was dissolved. A federal task force was assigned to audit grooming and discipline policies across the country. The White House requested Danielle's input on a National Educational Equity Act. Aiyana returned to school, to applause, not punishment. But for Danielle, the mission wasn't just justice. It was prevention. She launched the Aiyana Project, a national coalition of parents, educators, and legal experts designed to protect black children from biased disciplinary policies, offer legal support to families, expose systems of covert academic oppression, and most importantly, teach children their worth. The slogan, "We are not data, we are dreams." But just as things began to settle, one final envelope arrived. No stamp, no return address, just a handwritten message across the top. In case you ever forget why you started. Inside was a photo. It showed a young girl, no older than Aiyana, sitting in a makeshift testing room, alone, surrounded by observation cameras. On the back, scribbled in shaky handwriting, Florida, Genesis Project, Phase 1. Danielle stared at it for a long time, because she knew what it meant. There were still children in cages they couldn't see, still experiments wrapped in academic language, still boardrooms trading on little black futures. She picked up her phone, dialed Miles. "Get ready. We've got another fire to put out." What started as a suspension over a hairstyle became a movement. A mother's love turned into a courtroom reckoning. A child's courage sparked a national uprising. And a system that had been burning quietly behind closed doors was finally set ablaze in the open. This wasn't just a victory. It was a warning. To every principal, board member, and politician who ever looked at a black child and saw a statistic instead of a soul. We're watching now. We're organized. And we're never backing down. Life lesson. When the system punishes you for standing out, don't shrink, stand taller. Because your existence is resistance. And your truth is more powerful than their lies.